She smiled when the Alpha King rejected her in front of the whole pack. Then her true power awakened.
I reject you, Zora. Be gone!
The snow fell in silence over the great clearing, each flake drifting down like a whispered secret the sky could no longer keep. Thousands had gathered beneath the ancient oaks, their breath rising in pale ribbons as they stood shoulder to shoulder in the bitter cold. Torches lined the edges of the clearing, their flames trembling against the wind, casting restless shadows across the faces of wolves and men alike. This was the bonding rite, the oldest ceremony in the Northern Territories, and every pack within 100 leagues had answered the call. At the center of it all stood a dais carved from a single slab of granite, dragged down from the Frostspine Mountains 3 centuries ago by the first Alpha King. It was upon this stone that every king since had claimed his mate, pressing his palm to hers before the watching eyes of every bloodline. And it was upon this stone that Alaric Voss, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, would reject his. Zora Ward stood at the base of the dais, her bare feet sinking into the snow. She wore a simple dress of pale gray wool, no jewels, no furs, nothing to mark her as anything more than what the world believed her to be, the last surviving daughter of a fallen pack. The Ward bloodline had been reduced to ash and rumor 5 winters ago, when a rogue attack had swept through their settlement in a single night. Zora had been found 3 days later, wandering the frozen river with no memory of how she had survived, clutching a pendant she could not open, and speaking a name no one recognized. She had been taken in by the Silver Ridge Pack out of obligation, not kindness. Their alpha, a man called Fenwick, had placed her at the bottom of the hierarchy. She ate last. She slept in the coldest corner of the longhouse. She scrubbed the floors and mended the clothing, and absorbed every slight and bruise in silence. And when the Moon Oracle had spoken her name during the Rite of Revelation 3 days ago, declaring her the fated mate of the Alpha King himself, the Silver Ridge wolves had laughed so hard, some of them had choked on their mead. But the Oracle had not laughed, and the old woman's milky eyes had settled on Zora with something that looked less like prophecy and more like sorrow. Now Zora stood before the entire world, or at least the only world that mattered to wolves. She could feel them pressing in from every side, thousands of golden eyes, gray eyes, amber eyes, all fixed on her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. She heard the whispers slithering through the crowd like snakes through dead leaves. That's her? The Ward girl? She doesn't even have a wolf. I heard she's never shifted. How can a wolfless nobody be mated to the king? Zora kept her gaze forward. She had learned long ago that looking down only invited more cruelty, and looking up only invited disappointment. So she looked straight ahead, at the broad back of the man who stood upon the dais with his spine rigid and his jaw carved from stone. Alaric Voss was everything the ballads said he was, and more, tall enough to block the torchlight, with shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of every pack beneath them. His dark hair was swept back from a face that was brutally handsome, sharp cheekbones, a strong brow, lips pressed into a line so thin they might have been drawn with a blade. His eyes were the pale blue of a winter sky just before a storm, and when he turned them on Zora, she felt the cold reach deeper than the snow ever could. He did not come down to meet her. He looked at her from above, the way a king looks at a petition he intends to deny. I have heard the oracle's declaration, he said, and his voice rolled across the clearing like distant thunder. Every whisper died, every breath stilled. I have considered it carefully. He paused. Zora felt the silence pressing against her ribs, and I reject it. The crowd erupted. Not in shock, no. There was too much satisfaction in the sound for that. It was a release, a collective exhale of relief that the natural order had been preserved. The wolfless girl would not sit beside the king. The fallen bloodline would remain fallen. The world made sense again. But Zora did not crumble. She did not weep. She did not drop to her knees in the snow the way half the crowd expected and the other half hoped. She smiled. It was not a bitter smile, nor a broken one. It was small and quiet and real, the way a flame looks just before it catches the kindling. It spread across her face with a warmth that had no business existing in that frozen clearing, and it stopped Alaric Voss mid-breath. He had prepared himself for tears, for pleading, for the kind of desperate, crawling grief that lesser wolves wore when rejected by their mates. He had not prepared for this girl with snow in her hair and bare feet in the ice, smiling at him as though he had just set her free. "You smile?" His voice was lower now, edged with something that was not quite anger and not quite confusion. "I reject you before every pack in the north, and you smile?" Zora tilted her head slightly. The pendant at her throat, a small, tarnished thing shaped like a crescent moon, caught the torchlight and flashed once, like a wink. "I smile, my king," she said, and her voice was steady as bedrock, "because you have just made the greatest mistake of your reign, and I am relieved that it is yours to make and not mine." The silence that followed was different from the first. The first had been anticipation. This one was disbelief. A low murmur ran through the crowd. In the front row, an enormous wolf with a scarred muzzle, Fenwick, the Silver Ridge Alpha, barked a harsh laugh. "Take her away!" Fenwick called out, his voice thick with contempt. "She's embarrassing herself. Always has been too stupid to know her place." Two Silver Ridge enforcers stepped forward, reaching for Zora's arms. But the moment their fingers touched her skin, something happened that no one, not the crowd, not the enforcers, not even Zora herself, could have predicted. The pendant shattered. It did not break the way metal breaks it burst, as though whatever had been sealed inside could no longer be contained. A pulse of light erupted from Zora's chest, silver and blinding, and the two enforcers were thrown backward, as though struck by an invisible hand. They landed 10 paces away, sprawled in the snow, gasping. Zora staggered. She pressed a hand to her chest where the pendant had hung, and felt something beneath her palm that she had never felt before, a heartbeat that was not entirely her own. It was deeper, wilder, older. It thrummed through her bones like the earth itself was breathing inside her. "What?" she whispered, but the word was swallowed by the roar that tore from her throat. Except it was not her throat. Not anymore. The shift came without warning and without mercy. It was not the graceful, practiced transformation of a trained wolf. It was an eruption, violent and beautiful and ancient, as though something that had been caged for years had finally broken its chains. Her bones sang, her skin split and reformed. Light poured from the seams of her body like molten silver. And when it was done, a wolf stood where Zora had been. But not just any wolf. She was enormous, larger than Alaric's royal guard, larger than any alpha in the clearing. Her fur was the color of moonlight on fresh snow, so white it seemed to glow from within, and threaded through with veins of silver that pulsed like living starlight. Her eyes, when she opened them, were no longer the soft brown that Zora had worn her whole life. They were gold, true gold, the ancient gold of the first wolves, the color that had not been seen in 1,000 years. The crowd fell silent, with a terror that went deeper than fear. It was recognition. It was the bone-deep knowledge that they were in the presence of something that should not exist, something from the old stories, the ones told in whispers around dying fires. A white wolf. The Moon Oracle was the first to move. The old woman dropped to her knees in the snow, her gnarled hands pressed together, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Lunara, save us," she breathed. The bloodline lives. The Moonborn walks again. The words spread through the crowd like wildfire through dry grass. Moonborn. It was a word from legend, from the time before the Pack territories had been drawn, when the first wolves had walked the earth with the moon's own power burning in their veins. The Moonborn were not merely wolves. They were chosen, blessed, anointed by the moon goddess herself. They could command the loyalty of any wolf. They could heal wounds with a touch. They could walk between the waking world and the spirit realm as easily as stepping through a door. And they had been hunted to extinction, or so everyone had believed. Zora, the wolf that was Zora, stood trembling in the snow, overwhelmed by senses she had never possessed. She could smell the fear rolling off the crowd in thick, acrid waves. She could hear heartbeats, thousands of them drumming in a terrified chorus. She could feel the earth beneath her paws humming with a power that seemed to pulse in time with the moon overhead, full and bright and closer than it had any right to be. She turned her golden gaze to the dais. Alaric Voss had not moved. He stood like a man carved from ice, his pale blue eyes wide, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. She could smell something beneath his shock, something sharp and aching that his expression refused to show. Regret. It tasted like iron and winter rain. For a long moment, Wolf and King stared at each other across the silence. Then Zora did something that no rejected mate in the history of the Northern Territories had ever done. She turned her back on him. She turned and walked, not ran. Walked through the crowd, and the sea of wolves parted before her like water before a ship's prow. No one reached for her. No one spoke. They simply stepped aside, some bowing their heads without understanding why, driven by an instinct older than language. She walked until the torchlight faded behind her and the forest swallowed her whole. And the last thing the great clearing saw was the silver glow of her fur disappearing between the ancient oaks, like a ghost returning to the world it had been stolen from. 3 days passed, and the Northern Territories did not sleep. In every longhouse, every den, every frost-bitten settlement, from the Frostspine Mountains to the Gray Sea, they spoke of nothing else: the White Wolf, the Moonborn. The girl they had all dismissed, mocked, and mistreated, who had turned out to be the most powerful wolf born in 1,000 years, and the Alpha King who had rejected her in front of them all. Alaric had not spoken since the rite. He had returned to Ironhold, his fortress of black stone perched on the cliffs above the frozen river, and had shut himself in the war room with maps he did not read and wine he did not drink. His advisors came and went like anxious crows, pecking at his silence with warnings and counsel he refused to hear. "The other packs are talking," said Brennan, his second in command, a broad-shouldered wolf with copper hair and a permanent scowl. "The Ashfall wolves are saying the moon goddess has cursed you. The Ember Coast pack is calling for a council. And the Frostfang Alpha sent a runner this morning. He wants to know if Zora Ward is available for a bonding offer." That last part made Alaric's hand tighten around the arm of his chair until the wood groaned. "She is my mate," he said, and the words came out low and rough, scraping against his throat like they had been trapped there for days. Brennan stared at him. "You rejected her, in front of every wolf in the— I know what I did." "Then you know she is no longer bound to you, by our own laws, a rejected mate." "I know the laws, Brennan." Alaric stood abruptly, sending his chair skidding back across the stone floor. He crossed to the window and stared out at the frozen landscape below. The river was a silver ribbon in the moonlight, and beyond it, the forest stretched dark and endless. She was out there. He could feel her a pull behind his ribs that he had tried to ignore and failed. The bond was not gone. It should have been. A rejection, spoken before witnesses at a bonding rite, should have severed it cleanly. But the thread between them had not broken. It had changed. It was thinner now, and it ached, with a constant, low-grade pain that no amount of distance could ease. "Why did you do it?" Brennan asked quietly. "The truth this time, not the excuse about political alliances and the southern pacts." Alaric was silent for a long time. "Because I looked at her," he said finally, "and I was afraid." Brennan waited. She stood there barefoot in the snow, with nothing, no pack, no name, no wolf that anyone could see, and she looked at me without flinching. Every other wolf in that clearing was either terrified of me or desperate to please me. She was neither. She just looked at me like she could see past every wall I've built. And he stopped. His jaw worked. "I was not prepared for what that felt like. So you rejected her." "I rejected her because I am a fool," Alaric said flatly. "And now I have to find her before the Frostfang Alpha does, because if Theron gets his hands on a moonborn wolf, the balance of power in the north will collapse within a season." Brennan considered this. And if she doesn't want to be found? If she decides you don't deserve a second chance? Alaric turned from the window. For the first time in 3 days, something moved behind his eyes, not the cold authority of a king, but the raw, unguarded desperation of a man who had thrown away the only thing that mattered. "Then I will spend the rest of my life earning one." Zora had not returned to her human form for 2 days, and she was beginning to wonder if she ever would. The wolf, her wolf, was a revelation. After 21 years of emptiness, a feeling like a vessel with nothing inside, the sudden fullness of it was overwhelming. Every sense was a symphony. The crunch of snow beneath her paws, the crystalline silence of the frozen forest, the way the moonlight filtered through the bare branches and landed on her fur like a benediction. She had found shelter in an abandoned den deep in the Whispering Woods, a stretch of ancient forest that most wolves avoided. The trees here were older than the pack system itself, massive, gnarled things with bark like iron and roots that plunged so deep they were said to drink from the world's own veins. Spirits lived here, the old wolves said. Ghosts and echoes and things that watched, with eyes you could never quite see. Zora was not afraid. For the first time in her life, she was not afraid of anything. On the 3rd morning, she woke in human form, curled naked in a nest of fallen leaves, with her silver-white hair spread around her like a veil. The shift had happened in her sleep gentle this time, not the violent eruption of the clearing. She sat up slowly, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold, and realized with a start that she was not cold at all. A warmth pulsed beneath her skin, steady and constant, as though she carried a small sun inside her chest. She looked down at her hands. They were the same hands calloused from years of scrubbing floors and mending clothes, but there was something different now. A faint silver luminescence traced the veins beneath her skin, visible only when she turned her wrists in the light, and the pendant was gone. In its place, on the skin over her heart, was a mark, a crescent moon, silvery white, as though someone had painted it there with starlight. "You have been sleeping for a long time, little moon." Zora spun toward the voice. Sitting on a fallen log at the edge of the den, wrapped in a cloak of gray fur that seemed to shift and shimmer like smoke, was an old woman she had never seen before. Her face was ageless, neither young nor old, but somehow both, and her eyes were the same impossible gold that Zora had seen in her own reflection by the frozen stream. "Who are you?" Zora asked. "I am the one who sealed your power when you were a child," the woman said. "And I am the one who has been waiting, rather impatiently, for it to wake up." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that held centuries inside it. "My name is Era. I was your mother's guardian, and her mother's before that, and her mother's before that. I am the last of the Moonkeepers, the wolves who served the Moonborn line since the beginning, and you, Zora Ward are the last of the Moonborn themselves. Zora stared at her. My mother. I don't remember my mother. No, you wouldn't. The seal I placed on you took your memories along with your wolf. It was the only way to hide you from the ones who destroyed your pack. Era's golden eyes darkened. The attack on the Ward pack was not random, child. It was a hunt. Someone discovered what your bloodline carried, and they sent wolves to end it. I arrived too late to save the others, but I found you 3 years old, standing in the ashes with your wolf already trying to emerge. I sealed it. I sealed everything, and I placed you where I thought you would be safe. Safe? The word came out sharp and bitter, and Zora felt the wolf stir inside her, responding to her anger. You placed me with the Silver Ridge Pack. Do you know what they did to me? Do you know what my life has been? I know, Ira said softly. And I am sorry. I chose wrong. I thought a small pack would overlook you. Instead, She stopped, and for a moment, the ancient composure cracked, and Zora saw grief underneath it. I watched, when I could. I interfered, when I dared. The time your fever should have killed you, that was me. The night the enforcer tried to drag you into the woods, the branch that fell on his head was not an accident. Zora blinked. She remembered that night. She had been 16, and the crash of that falling branch had been the only thing between her and something unspeakable. She had thought it was luck. But I could not unseal your wolf until the time was right, Era continued. The seal was tied to your pendant, a fragment of your mother's own moonstone. It would only break when you were in the presence of your true mate, and when the pain of rejection cracked the walls I had built around your power. You knew I would be rejected, Zora said slowly. I knew it was possible. The Alpha King is proud, and pride makes fools of the best men. But I also knew that your wolf was too strong, and your blood too ancient, to remain hidden once the bond was triggered. The rejection was the key, child. Not because you needed to suffer, the goddess knows you have suffered enough, but because your wolf needed your fury to break free. Zora sat with this for a long time, listening to the wind move through the ancient trees like a lullaby. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. What happens now? Iris stood, and the gray cloak rippled around her like living mist. Now I teach you what you are. Now you learn to wield the power that runs through your blood. Power that can heal or destroy, command or liberate, depending on the heart that holds it. You have perhaps a fortnight before the world comes looking for you. The Alpha King will come. Others will, too, not all of them friendly. You must be ready. And the king? Zora asked, and she hated how the question made her chest tighten. What do I do about him? Era gave her a look that was equal parts wisdom and mischief. That, little moon, depends entirely on whether he deserves you, and that is something only you can decide. Alaric tracked her for 6 days. He went alone, against the vehement protests of Brennan and his entire war council. A king did not chase after a rejected mate like a lovesick yearling. A king did not abandon his fortress with threats gathering on every border. A king certainly did not shift into his wolf form and run through the whispering woods at midnight, following a scent that smelled like moonflowers and winter frost, and something so achingly familiar it made his bones hurt. But Alaric had stopped being a king the moment she smiled at him. He just had not realized it yet. The whispering woods resisted him at every turn. Branches snagged his fur. Roots rose from the frozen ground to trip his paws. The forest itself seemed to be testing him, or perhaps warning him, pushing back against his presence as though he were an infection it was trying to expel. On the 4th day, he found her scent layered with another older, wilder, laced with a power that made the fur along his spine stand rigid, a moon keeper. He had thought they were legend, like the Moonborn themselves. The realization that Zora was not alone, that she had a protector, a teacher, should have eased his worry. Instead, it sharpened it. Every day she grew stronger was a day the distance between them widened. A day the rejection hardened from a wound into a wall. On the 6th day, he found her. She was standing in a clearing he was certain had not existed an hour ago, and the sight of her stopped him dead in his tracks. She was in human form, dressed in a gown of white fur that seemed woven from the snow itself. Her hair longer now, impossibly so, silver white and shimmering, hung past her waist. The crescent mark on her chest glowed faintly, even through the fabric, like a heart made of moonlight. But it was her eyes that undid him, golden, ancient, looking at him with a clarity that stripped every pretense, every defense, every wall he had ever built. He shifted to human form and stood before her in the snow, bare and shivering in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "You found me," she said. Her voice had changed, it was still hers, still Zora, but there was a resonance beneath it now, as though the forest itself was speaking with her. "I will always find you." The words left him before he could shape them into something more dignified, and he did not try to take them back. "You rejected me, Alaric. I know. In front of every wolf in the north. I know. You looked at me like I was nothing, like I was dirt beneath the stone you stood on." He flinched. It was a small thing, a tightening of the muscles around his eyes, a fractional drop of his gaze. But she saw it, and he knew she saw it, and the knowledge that he could no longer hide from her was both terrifying and oddly liberating. "I looked at you," he said carefully, "and I saw something I was not ready to face. You stood before me with nothing, no power, no name, no pack, and you were more than I have ever been. I rejected you, because accepting you would have meant admitting that everything I built my life around, strength, dominance, control, was not enough. That I was not enough." Zora was quiet for a long time. "That," she said finally, "is the first honest thing you have ever said to me. It will not be the last. If you let me, I will spend every remaining day of my life proving that." He took a step forward. The snow crunched beneath his bare foot. "I am not asking you to forgive me, Zora. I am asking you to let me earn the right to ask for forgiveness. And if I say no," he held her gaze, "then I will go, and I will protect you from a distance, and I will make sure no wolf in the north ever threatens you, and I will live with the knowledge that the greatest power I ever held was standing in front of me, and I was too much of a coward to hold her hand." The golden eyes studied him with an intensity that felt like standing in direct sunlight. Then, slowly, something shifted in her expression. Not forgiveness, it was too soon for that, and they both knew it. But the wall between them thinned, just enough for him to see the woman behind the legend. "The Frostfang Alpha," she said. "Theron. He has sent wolves into the woods. I can feel them." Alaric's expression hardened instantly. "How many?" 30. Perhaps more. They crossed the northern border at dawn. She paused, and the faintest hint of a smile touched her lips. "They think I am prey." "Are you?" The smile widened, and Alaric felt the ground beneath him hum. The trees around the clearing groaned, their branches bending inward as though bowing. The moonlight, already bright, intensified until the clearing was bathed in silver radiance, and Zora's crescent mark blazed like a star. "I am the last Moonborn," she said, and her voice echoed through the forest in a way that made every bird fall silent and every predator within miles freeze in its tracks. "I am the daughter of the Ward bloodline, the heir of the first wolves, and the chosen of the moon goddess. I am no one's prey." She extended her hand, not to him, not yet, to the forest itself. and from the shadows between the trees, wolves began to emerge. Not Theron's wolves, wild ones, rogue ones, lone wolves who had been living in the Whispering Woods for years, decades, maybe longer. Gray wolves and black wolves and red wolves, their eyes all fixed on Zora with a devotion that went beyond loyalty. They had felt her power. They had come. Alaric watched as no fewer than 40 wolves materialized from the darkness and formed a loose circle around the clearing. Then he looked at Zora, this barefoot girl he had dismissed, this orphan he had rejected, this woman who was raising an army with nothing more than the force of her blood and the fire of her will, and he understood, with the absolute certainty of a man who has glimpsed his own smallness, that he was looking at the future of the Northern Territories. "You asked what happens now," he said quietly. "Tell me. I will follow." Zora looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to face the north, where Theron's wolves were closing in through the frozen trees. "Now," she said, "we show them what a mistake looks like from the other side." Theron's wolves came through the trees like shadows, silent, disciplined, their pale eyes gleaming with predatory focus. The Frost Fang pack was known for its ruthlessness. They bred their wolves for size and aggression, culling the weak, rewarding the vicious. Theron himself was a monster of a wolf, nearly as large as Alaric, with gray-black fur and a muzzle permanently twisted from a fight that had killed 3 opponents and left him with a taste for blood that strategy alone could not satisfy. He wanted the Moonborn. With her power at his side, willing or not, he would be unstoppable. He would challenge Alaric for the throne. He would remake the North in his image, brutal, unforgiving, a kingdom of fangs. What he found in the clearing was not what he expected. Zora stood at the center, glowing like a fallen star. Around her, the wild wolves waited with the eerie stillness of soldiers who had found their general. And beside her, close enough to touch, but carefully not touching, stood the Alpha King, his own wolf barely leashed beneath his skin, his pale eyes burning with a protective fury that turned the air around him sharp. Theron emerged from the tree line in human form, flanked by his 2 largest enforcers. He was a handsome man in the way that storms are handsome, wild-haired, sharp-featured, with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Well," he said, surveying the clearing. "The little wolfless girl has found her teeth, and her rejected king has come crawling back." He laughed, and the sound cracked through the silent forest like breaking ice. "This saves me a trip to Ironhold." "Turn around, Theron," Alaric said. "Walk away. You have 1 chance." "1 chance?" Theron spread his arms wide. "I have 30 wolves at my back, Voss. You have a pack of wild strays and a girl who just learned how to shift. The odds are mine." Zora spoke then, and her voice was calm, so calm that it made the hairs on Theron's arms rise, despite himself. "You miscount," she said. "You have 30 wolves at your back. I have the forest." Theron opened his mouth to reply, but the words never came, because in that moment, the Whispering Woods woke up. It began with the roots. They surged from the frozen earth like the fingers of some vast, buried creature, wrapping around the ankles of Theron's wolves with a grip that no amount of thrashing could break. The trees groaned and shifted, their branches sweeping low to form walls of living wood that cut off every avenue of retreat. The moonlight concentrated, narrowing into beams that struck the clearing like spotlights, and everywhere they touched, the snow began to steam. Zora raised her hand, and the crescent mark on her chest blazed so brightly that Theron's wolves whimpered and pressed themselves flat against the ground. It was not a physical force, it was a command, older than language, woven into the very fabric of what it meant to be a wolf. Every animal in that forest felt it. Submit. One by one, Theron's wolves lowered their heads, not because they chose to, but because their wolves, the beasts inside them, recognized something their human minds could not comprehend. A power that predated pack law. A power that predated kings. Only Theron remained standing, his teeth bared, his eyes wild with a rage that bordered on madness. "I will not kneel to a ghost," he snarled. "Then you will kneel to me," Alaric said, and shifted. The fight was brutal and brief. Alaric was the Alpha King for a reason. His wolf was a mountain of black fur and muscle, faster than any creature that size had a right to be. Theron was strong, but he was also reckless, driven by fury instead of strategy. He lunged. Alaric sidestepped. He snapped. Alaric caught his jaws mid-bite and hurled him into the snow. In the end, Theron lay on his side in the churned-up snow, Alaric's jaws around his throat, not biting, holding. The oldest gesture of dominance, a wolf offering another, the choice between submission and death. Theron submitted. When Alaric stepped back and shifted to human form, he was breathing hard, but uninjured. Theron's wolves freed from the roots as Zora lowered her hand, slunk away through the trees with their tails tucked, carrying their defeated alpha between them. The clearing was quiet again. Alaric turned to Zora. She was watching him with those golden eyes, and he could not read what was in them. He waited, his chest heaving, his blood still singing with the violence of the fight. "You fought for me," she said. "I fought beside you," he corrected. "I will never again presume to fight for you. You do not need it." Something cracked in her expression. It was small, a tremor at the corner of her mouth, a brightness in her eyes that might have been tears if she were the kind of woman who let them fall. "That," she whispered, "is the second honest thing you have said to me." She did not take his hand. She did not forgive him. But when she turned and walked deeper into the forest, she did not tell him to stop following. And Alaric, who had commanded armies and conquered territories and bent the will of every wolf in the north to his own, followed her like a man who had finally found something worth being humble for. They said afterward that the winter grew gentler that year, though no one could explain why. The snow still fell, but it fell softer. The wind still blew, but it carried a warmth that had no source. The whispering woods, which had been avoided for generations, began to bloom even in the dead of winter. Pale silver flowers pushed through the frost, and the wolves who ventured near the tree line swore they could hear singing. Zora did not return to the great clearing that season, nor the next. She stayed in the whispering woods with Aira, learning the depth and breadth of her inheritance, the healing touch, the spirit walk, the ancient communion with the moon that allowed her to feel every wolf in the territory, like notes in a vast, living song. She was not hiding, she was becoming. Alaric came to the edge of the woods every seventh day, as regular as the tides. He brought no gifts, made no demands, offered no speeches. He simply stood at the tree line and waited. Sometimes she came, sometimes she didn't. When she did, they talked carefully at first, the way two people talk when there is too much broken glass between them to move quickly. He told her about the burden of the crown and the loneliness of a throne that everyone feared and no one touched. She told him about the years of silence inside her own body, the ache of a wolf that could not howl. They did not touch. But the bond between them, that thin, aching thread that the rejection had failed to sever, grew stronger with each meeting. Not because of fate or magic or the decree of any goddess, because they chose it. Because he showed up, and she let him, and slowly, with the patience of roots breaking through stone, trust began to grow in the space where pain had been. On the first day of spring, when the snow began its long retreat and the rivers shook off their ice with a sound like breaking chains, Zora walked out of the whispering woods. She walked to the great clearing, where the granite dais still stood beneath the ancient oaks. She walked barefoot, as she had before, with snow still clinging to the ground in patches. But this time she wore a gown of silver white, and the crescent mark on her chest blazed openly, and a procession of wolves followed her wild and pack alike in a river of fur and loyalty that stretched back into the forest as far as the eye could see. Alaric was waiting on the dais, not standing above it this time, standing before it, at the bottom, in the same place where she had stood on the night he had broken both their hearts. The packs had gathered again, drawn by rumor and instinct, and the unmistakable pull of history being made. They lined the clearing in their thousands, silent, watching. Zora stopped in front of him. The space between them was small enough to cross with a single step, but it felt as vast as the distance between the moon and the earth. "I have not forgiven you," she said. Her voice carried across the clearing, clear as a bell struck in the silence of a cathedral. Forgiveness is not something that happens in a season. It is something that is built, stone by stone, over a lifetime. Alaric held her gaze and said nothing. "But I have decided," she continued, "that you are worth the building." She extended her hand. He took it. And every wolf in the clearing felt it a pulse, deep and resonant, that rolled out from the place where their palms touched, like a wave across a still lake. It was not the severing snap of a rejected bond, or the forced chain of an unwilling union. It was something new, something forged, not by fate alone, but by choice, by pain survived, by the terrifying decision to trust the one who had hurt you most. The moon, hidden behind clouds all day, broke free. Its light poured down into the clearing like liquid silver, and for one breathtaking moment, every wolf present, every single one, felt the Moonborn's heartbeat inside their own chest, steady and fierce and unbreakable. The Oracle, still kneeling, still weeping, whispered something that the wind carried to every ear. The broken mate becomes the crown. The rejected wolf becomes the throne. So it was promised. So it is done. Zora looked at Alaric, the man who had rejected her, the man who had chased her, the man who had knelt and fought and waited and chosen her, over and over, until the choosing itself became a kind of love. And she smiled. Not the small, quiet smile of the rejection night. This one was wide and bright and fierce, the kind of smile that held the future inside it like a seed holds a forest. Above them, the moon blazed, and the wolves began to howl.